We spend over a decade sitting in hard chairs, memorizing formulas, reviewing historical dates, and learning how to answer whatever we're told. We're trained to memorize, to obey, to produce. But no one ever stops to ask, do you know how to live? What does it really mean to enjoy life? I'm not talking about luxury, vacations, or weekend fun. I'm talking about being present, about awareness, about finding meaning that's truly yours, not something handed down by grades, rankings, or performance goals. We live as if life were a line we're all stuck in. School, college, work, retirement, and somewhere along the way, they forgot to teach us the most important thing: how to live with freedom, with authenticity, with joy in the simple things. School doesn't teach it. Family often doesn't know how. And society is in too much of a rush. But philosophy has always talked about it. From Plato to Nietzsche, from Epicurus to Byung-Chul Han, many have asked, why do we live so poorly, even with so much knowledge? Today, we're going to dive deep into this topic. We'll explore why we're never really taught how to enjoy life, and what we can do with that realization, because maybe life truly begins when we stop just checking boxes and start questioning everything. Imagine being chained since birth inside a dark cave, staring at a wall. Behind you, a fire casts shadows of objects carried by people walking along a raised path. You don't see the people or the real objects, only their shadows. To you, those shapes on the wall are reality. That's the metaphor Plato gives us in his famous allegory of the cave, found in Book 7 of the Republic. For Plato, the cave represents the world we experience with our senses, the world of sights, sounds, touch. It's the everyday world of appearances, surface-level opinions, instant desires, and according to him, most people live exactly like this, confusing shadows for truth, distracted by noise, images, and false needs. But why does this matter today? Because the core idea of the cave is brutally relevant. We live surrounded by distractions and illusions, thinking we're fully living, when really we're just reacting, repeating, consuming. Just like the prisoners in the cave didn't realize they were imprisoned, we often don't notice the invisible prison keeping us from living with awareness. The cave is a symbol of the human condition before philosophy. Plato. According to Plato, real life begins when we turn our eyes away from the wall, when we start questioning, doubting the obvious, and realizing there's more beyond the surface. The prisoner who breaks free and climbs out of the cave represents the one who begins the journey toward knowledge, truth, and inner freedom. But that journey isn't easy. It's painful. Plato says that when the prisoner first sees the sunlight, it hurts his eyes. That pain represents the discomfort of facing reality. It's the hard process of breaking free from illusions, letting go of false beliefs, and challenging automatic habits. Truly living isn't a stroll, it's a philosophical struggle. And when this person, now enlightened by truth, returns to the cave to free the others, he's mocked. No one believes him. They think he's crazy. Because truth demands change, and change takes courage. And most people don't want to change. They prefer the comfort of shadows. Ask yourself, how many times have you accepted something as true just because you never questioned it? How often do we follow the life script, school, work, consume, repeat, without ever asking, is this really living? That's Plato's core critique. Most of us don't actually live. We just react to what the world projects on the wall. And that's one of the main reasons we're not taught how to enjoy life. We're too busy chasing shadows. We live for images, status, appearance, validation. We chase things as if they were ends in themselves. But for Plato, true happiness doesn't come from instant pleasure, social approval, or material stuff. It comes from the knowledge of the good. At the top of Plato's hierarchy is the idea of the good, a concept that goes beyond anything temporary. It's the ultimate truth, the force that gives meaning to everything else. It's what guides a life that is just, beautiful, and meaningful. But this good isn't something you memorize or get handed to you. You have to seek it, live it, earn it. And that path, Plato calls philosophy, the love of wisdom. So the cave isn't just a metaphor about ignorance, it's an invitation to inner freedom. It's Plato saying, you're capable of a bigger life, but to live it, you need the courage to step out of the cave. Today, our caves are more high-tech. They're on our screens, in the algorithms, the ads, the fear of being alone. We're constantly pulled in by new distractions, polarizing debates, and fake desires. We're surrounded by digital shadows that fill our minds and keep us from asking the real questions. What makes a good life? What makes life worth living? And here's the key point. For Plato, enjoying life isn't about chasing sensory pleasure. It's not about doing whatever feels good in the moment. It's about nurturing the soul, shaping your thinking, developing virtue. Because only a well-formed soul can experience true freedom. Only those who break free from illusions can live authentically. Education is the art of leading the soul out of the cave, into the light. Plato. This way of thinking goes completely against what modern society teaches us. Today, it's all about live in the moment, do what feels good, treat yourself. But Plato warned, that might just be another distraction, another shadow on the wall. Pleasure without reflection is short-lived, and often it's just another form of slavery disguised as freedom. Real life isn't about excess, it's about clarity. It's about balance, self-mastery, and the pursuit of what's true and just. And you won't learn that in schools designed to prepare you for the job market. You have to go after it yourself with philosophical courage. That's where the cave becomes a mirror for your own life. Where are you in the cave right now? Are you still mesmerized by the shadows? Or have you started to suspect there's more beyond the wall? There is a way out, but it takes effort. It takes uncomfortable questions. It takes letting go of easy answers. And maybe that's why so few people take that path, because truly, living takes work. But as Plato shows us, it's the only path that's truly worth it. Have you ever asked yourself what it really means to be happy? Not in a shallow, temporary way, like buying something new, getting a compliment, or going on vacation. I'm talking about deep, lasting happiness, a life that feels meaningful, fulfilling, and worth living all the way through. For Aristotle, one of the greatest philosophers of ancient Greece, that question is at the heart of all philosophy. At the beginning of his most important work on ethics, Nicomachean Ethics, he makes a bold claim. Every human action aims at some good, and the highest good is what we seek for its own sake, eudaimonia. So, what exactly is eudaimonia? Although it's often translated as happiness, eudaimonia goes far beyond pleasure. It means something more like human flourishing, deep fulfillment, or living well. For Aristotle, true happiness doesn't come from external goods, sensory pleasures, or fleeting emotions. It comes from living in alignment with reason and developing the virtues of the soul. Sounds abstract? Let's make it real. Picture a life where you build strong character, control your impulses, make wise decisions, act justly, stay steady through hard times, and find balance in everything. A life where you build good habits, not out of obligation, but because you understand they shape who you are. For Aristotle, that is a happy life. That's eudaimonia. Happiness is an activity of the soul in accordance with virtue. Aristotle. But this kind of happiness doesn't just happen. Aristotle says happiness is the natural goal of human life, just like blooming is the natural goal of a seed. But just like a seed needs soil, water, light, and care to grow, we also need certain conditions to reach our full potential, and the tool that helps us get there is reason. Among all living beings, only humans have logos, the ability to think, judge, reflect, and choose. Living according to reason is what makes us truly human. That's why Aristotle rejects the idea that pleasure, wealth, or fame are life's ultimate goals. They might be nice or useful, but they're just means, not ends. A life focused on pleasure is unstable. A life chasing wealth is never satisfied. The only life that's truly fulfilling is one guided by arete, virtue. So what are virtues according to Aristotle? They're qualities we build over time, traits that become part of our character through repeated action. You're not born courageous, generous, or just. You become those things by consistently acting that way. Just like a musician becomes skilled by practicing, a person becomes ethical by practicing goodness. And this isn't about being rigid or moralistic. Aristotle was very practical. He believed in the idea of the golden mean. Virtue lies in balance between extremes. Courage is the balance between cowardice and recklessness. Generosity sits between stinginess and wastefulness. Temperance lives between repression and indulgence. Each virtue is a personal quest for balance, guided by reason. And that quest is deeply individual. There's no one-size-fits-all formula. Each person, in their unique situation, has to use practical wisdom, phronesis, to figure out how to act well. Aristotle saw living virtuously as an art, one that takes awareness, sensitivity, and commitment. But why does this make us happy? Because for Aristotle, happiness isn't about the result, it's about the activity. It's a way of being, not a reward you get. When you act with excellence, you're being your true self. You're living your nature fully. Happiness isn't something you have, it's something you do. Think about it. How many times have you felt most fulfilled, not when you received something, but when you overcame a challenge, did the right thing, helped someone, or made a tough decision with wisdom? That's what eudaimonia feels like. It's not a high, it's depth. And this has huge implications for how we look at modern life. Today's society tells us that happiness means instant pleasure, consuming more, and showing off achievements. But Aristotle warns, that path leads to constant frustration. Pleasure without virtue is like trying to satisfy hunger with air. It's empty, temporary, never enough. That's why so many people feel lost, even when they have comfort and options. What's missing is purpose, direction, inner growth. And that kind of growth isn't taught in school or promoted by mainstream culture. It requires a conscious choice. Are you choosing to grow? Aristotle believed a good life is possible, but not automatic. It takes character development, ongoing reflection, true friendship, and involvement in community life. Yes, eudaimonia isn't a solo journey. It involves connection, mutual support, and building something together. A good life is also a life with others. Man is by nature a political animal. Aristotle. That's why he said the goal of politics isn't power for its own sake, but to create conditions that help people live well. In other words, society's role should be to form virtuous, fulfilled individuals. But is that what we see today? We live in a time of anxiety, constant comparison, and superficiality. People look for meaning in distractions, chase happiness through dopamine, and seek fulfillment in status. Aristotle would remind us, that's not living, that's just existing. The real challenge is to relearn the art of living with purpose. And that doesn't mean giving up pleasure, but putting it in its proper place. True pleasure, for Aristotle, is what naturally comes from living virtuously. Just like music brings joy to a skilled musician, a good life brings joy to someone who lives with excellence. So ask yourself, are you nurturing your soul? Are you practicing virtues? Are you using your reason to grow each day? Because in the end, eudaimonia isn't some mystical state. It's the daily result of small, right choices. It's living in harmony with who you are, what you believe, and how you act. It's turning your life into an ethical work of art. And the best part, this life is within everyone's reach. It doesn't matter where you are, what you have, or what you've been through. Eudaimonia starts now with the decision to live with awareness, character, and meaning. Imagine living each day with calm, no fear of the future, no regret over the past, and no chasing after desires you can't fulfill. sounds impossible. For the Greek philosopher Epicurus, that was exactly the path to a good life. Epicurus was likely the first philosopher to place pleasure at the center of ethics, but not the way most people think. He didn't promote wild parties, indulgence, or luxury. In fact, Epicurus taught that true pleasure is simple, peaceful, and rational. And the biggest obstacles that keep us from enjoying life are two invisible poisons: fear and misguided desire. When we say that pleasure is the goal, we don't mean the pleasures of the indulgent, but the absence of pain in the body and disturbance in the soul. Letter to Marcuse. That quote is a key to understanding the real Epicurus. For him, happiness isn't about intense pleasure, but about removing pain, both physical and mental. And he believed the greatest pains we suffer don't come from the body, but from the mind. Irrational fears and endless desires are what keep us from living well. Of all fears, Epicurus saw one as the most harmful: the fear of death. He believed this fear paralyzes us, creates anxiety, makes us vulnerable to religions that preach eternal punishment, and stops us from enjoying the present. But his answer was simple and bold. Death is nothing to us, because when we exist, death is not present, and when death is present, we no longer exist. Letter to Marcuse. Epicurus dismantles the fear of death with a clear argument: you will never be dead. When death arrives, you won't be conscious to experience it. So logically, there's no reason to fear it. The fear of death is a false perception, a mental illusion that robs us of peace. And once you let go of that fear, you start living more freely. You're no longer chained by religious guilt, anxiety about the future, or blind attachment to survival. You finally get to live now. Another fear Epicurus strongly challenged was the fear of the gods. In ancient Greece, many believed in gods who judged and punished people. But Epicurus broke with that idea completely. He believed the gods do exist, but they're completely indifferent to humanity. According to him, the gods live in perfect peace and don't get involved in human affairs. They don't reward, punish, or judge. They simply don't care about us. That means we don't have to live under religious guilt or fear divine judgment. Living ethically isn't about pleasing gods. It's about being at peace with yourself. This view caused outrage. For centuries, Epicurus was slandered as an atheist or immoral. But in truth, he offered a philosophical path to inner freedom, grounded in reason and calm. The other big obstacle to pleasure, according to Epicurus, is disordered desire. He was one of the first to classify our desires, and his list still makes sense today. Natural and necessary desires like food, water, sleep, shelter, companionship. Natural but not necessary desires like tasty food, comfort, leisure. Neither natural nor necessary desires like fame, power, excessive wealth, or social status. The problem isn't wanting. The problem is wanting things that are excessive, endless, and enslaving. Desires that never feel satisfied, that create anxiety, comparison, and envy. If you want to make a man rich, don't add to his possessions, reduce his desires. Epicurean fragment. For Epicurus, the simpler your lifestyle, the easier it is to be happy. He lived in a garden with friends, focused on essentials, and pursued something he called ataraxia, peace of mind. And that peace doesn't come from having more. It comes from being content with what's enough. Today, we're surrounded by messages that do the opposite, pushing us to consume more, want more, compete more. We're trained to always chase the next thing, and that pulls us away from Epicurean happiness. Instead of living, we waste our energy chasing things that never truly satisfy. How many times have you finally gotten something, only to feel empty right after? That's the hollow desire Epicurus warned about. His solution: self-awareness and philosophical simplicity. He invites us to question each desire and ask, do I really need this to be happy? Or am I just reacting to what others expect of me? Contrary to the common view, Epicurus wasn't against pleasure. He was for true pleasure, the kind that doesn't cause regret, stress, or dependence. It's the calm pleasure of a body at rest, a mind at peace, a real friendship, and inner freedom. Epicurus didn't reject pleasure. He rejected reckless pleasure that creates more pain than joy. He taught us to be selective with pleasures, because not every pleasure is worth it, and not every pain should be avoided. Wisdom is knowing the difference. Pleasure is the beginning and the end of a happy life. We recognize it as the first and natural good. Letter to Menocius. The Epicurean idea of pleasure is subtle, steady, and lasting. It's the quiet satisfaction of someone who knows their limits and lives in tune with their nature. No extremes, no pointless sacrifices, just enough, and that's everything. Unlike other schools of philosophy that loved public debate, Epicurus created his own private space, the garden. There, men and women, a rare thing at the time, lived simply, practicing philosophy as a way of life. It was a place of friendship, reflection, and self-care. Epicurus saw friendship as one of life's greatest pleasures, built on affection, trust, and shared experience. To live among friends, with moderation, without fear or excess, that was his recipe for happiness. And what about you? How are you searching for happiness? Do you feel free from the fear of death? Can you tell the difference between true desire and social pressure? Are you building simple, lasting pleasures, or just chasing distractions? Epicurus challenges us to look inward and ask, what's really stopping me from living peacefully? Maybe the answer isn't more pleasure, but less fear and fewer pointless desires. We live in an age of specialization. We're trained to solve problems, run systems, and deliver results. We learn how to calculate, code, and perform. But there's one essential thing we're never really taught: how to live. That's the core message of the Stoics, especially Epictetus, one of the greatest teachers of practical philosophy in ancient times. According to him, no education is complete if it ignores the development of character and the soul. What good is it to conquer the world if you haven't learned to master yourself? It's not what happens to you that matters, but how you react to it. Epictetus, the Manual. That line captures the heart of Stoicism. It's not about controlling the outside world. It's about mastering your inner world. The Stoics understood that life is full of things we can't control: loss, illness, injustice, failure. But they also believed there's one thing always within our power: our attitude toward those things. And that art of living, the skill of facing reality with wisdom, courage, and calm, should be the center of education. But it's not. Today, we train professionals, but not human beings. We learn how to win, but not how to lose. We learn how to speak, but not how to stay silent. We learn how to compete, but not how to accept. No one teaches us how to face pain, frustration, or uncertainty with dignity. The essential stuff gets left out. Epictetus, who lived as a slave before becoming a philosopher, knew this firsthand. He didn't have an easy life, but he discovered a deeper kind of freedom, inner freedom, and he taught that we gain this freedom by clearly understanding what's up to us and what isn't. That's the first lesson of Stoicism, and maybe the most life-changing one. Some things are within our control, others are not. What's within our control? Our opinions, desires, actions, judgments. What isn't? Our health, reputation, death, or outside events? According to Epictetus, suffering comes from trying to control what we can't and neglecting what we can. Think about how true that is in today's world. We worry about things we can't guarantee: other people's approval, financial success, public image. We torture ourselves over things that don't depend on us. And at the same time, we ignore the one thing that does: our behavior. That's why the Stoics talked about philosophical training. Living well takes practice. It takes awareness of your own thoughts. It takes discipline over your impulses. It's soul education. And that kind of education is rare because it's demanding, and it doesn't bring status or profit. Education is learning what we didn't know and unlearning what we thought we knew. Epictetus. For the Stoics, the art of living means living according to our rational and virtuous nature. That means pursuing integrity, wisdom, justice, and courage. It means building a soul that isn't shaken by praise or insult, a soul that stays steady through both fortune and misfortune. But where is that taught? How often in school were you invited to reflect on the fear of death, or how to deal with loss, or what it means to live a just life, or how to respond to injustice without becoming unjust yourself? The Stoics would say, we live in a world that knows a lot about things and very little about the soul. Epictetus didn't see philosophy as some abstract system. For him, philosophy was daily training to become a better person, like a gym for the soul. A Stoic was supposed to watch their reactions, examine their thoughts, challenge their beliefs, and act with intention. Because real freedom comes from self-control, and that doesn't mean being passive. Stoics weren't indifferent, as some people think. They simply believed that reacting with rage to the inevitable is a waste of energy. Instead, they practiced active acceptance, amor fati, to love what happens as it happens, and find virtue even in pain. Don't wish for events to happen as you want them to. Wish for them to happen as they do, and your life will be peaceful. Epictetus. That kind of peace isn't weakness, it's power, it's inner strength. It's the kind of stability that praise can't inflate and criticism can't shake. As Seneca said, a trained soul doesn't get tossed around by storms, it becomes the rudder. In practice, Stoics trained themselves with daily mental habits, remembering the impermanence of all things, preparing for loss and hardship, pausing before reacting, practicing gratitude even in discomfort, living with purpose, not just routine. These should be part of our education from early on, but we're taught to pass tests, not to overcome ego, to hit goals, not to grow in virtue. The result? A society full of skills, but lacking wisdom. Epictetus taught that no one can truly hurt you without your permission, because the real harm doesn't come from what happens, but from how we interpret it. Physical pain might be unavoidable, but emotional suffering is a mental choice. That's a freeing lesson, because it puts the power back in our hands. And that's the most important power of all, the power to live well, even when things go wrong. How often do we blame the world for our unhappiness? How often do we hold others responsible for how we feel? Epictetus invites us to pause and look within. No man is free who is not master of himself. Epictetus. The freedom he talks about isn't doing whatever you want. It's becoming who you choose to be, no matter the situation. That's the real art of living. And it takes ongoing training, a living philosophy, and a present mind. Today, when everything pulls us outward, toward noise, speed, and distraction, the voice of the Stoics feels like a call to wake up, not to escape life, but to live it with depth, with coherence, with strength. Because the world will always be out of our control, but our soul, if well trained, can be unshakable. To live is to suffer. That's the raw, deeply honest premise of Arthur Schopenhauer, one of the clearest and most somber minds in the history of philosophy. For him, life is not a gift, but a burden. And the real question isn't how to be happy, but how to endure suffering with dignity, and, when possible, find moments of relief and elevation. But what Schopenhauer offers goes far beyond basic pessimism. He presents a rare and refined alternative to hedonism, aesthetic contemplation as a way to rise above human suffering, a way of enjoying life, not through raw pleasure, but through a selfless experience of beauty. Life swings like a pendulum between pain and boredom. Schopenhauer, the world as will and representation. That line sums up his tragic view of existence. In his eyes, everything we do, our desires, ambitions, impulses, comes from a blind, irrational force. The will, not our conscious will, but a deep, impersonal life drive that pushes us to endlessly want, chase, consume, and fight. This will exists in everything: humans, animals, nature. It's the core of existence, but also its curse, because to desire is to suffer. What we want either escapes us, or once fulfilled, just makes room for another craving. We live in a non-stop cycle of need. Pleasure is short-lived, but lack is constant. So how do we escape that? Schopenhauer knew we can't eliminate the will, but he believed we could suspend it temporarily. And those moments happen, he said, through aesthetic contemplation. To contemplate, for Schopenhauer, isn't just to look. It's to enter a state of awareness where you want nothing, expect nothing. You simply are. It's a quiet fusion between you and the thing you're observing. In those moments, you forget yourself, forget time, forget the will, and for a little while, touch something beyond pain. When we admire a painting, hear sublime music, take in a vast landscape, or lose ourselves in deep reading, in those moments, we're not chasing anything. We're not trying to own, change, or control. We simply witness. Aesthetic contemplation is the path through which we free ourselves, even if briefly, from the slavery of the will. Schopenhauer. That state of pure contemplation is rare. Most people are too wrapped up in daily life, in goals, in wants. They can't unplug. We live distracted, driven by the will, and that's why we suffer so much. But the artist, and the true admirer of art, develops the ability to let go of the ego, to see the world not as a tool for getting things, but as something meaningful in itself. In that way, art becomes a kind of salvation. Not a fantasy, but a real elevation of consciousness. Schopenhauer saw art as the opposite of the world of the will. While real life is full of conflict, struggle, pain, and need, art brings harmony, form, and inner stillness. It shows us the essence of things, what he called Platonic ideas, and lets us, for a brief time, step outside ourselves. Music, especially, held a sacred place in Schopenhauer's thought. He believed music is the purest of all arts because it doesn't represent something. It directly expresses the will itself. That's why it moves us so deeply. It speaks a language older than thought. Music expresses the inner essence of the world as will and representation. And it's worth noticing, the more intense the art, the more we forget ourselves. That's freeing. Because it's the self, the one that suffers, wants, and fears, that we leave behind. In its place comes a pure presence, one that simply sees and feels, without clinging, without need. Today, when we talk about enjoying life, we usually think of chasing pleasures, fulfilling desires, or living to the fullest. But Schopenhauer would be skeptical, maybe even sarcastic, about that mindset. To him, hedonism is just another form of slavery to the will. Chasing pleasure is, at its core, chasing more suffering, because pleasure never truly satisfies, and when it's gone, it leaves a hole. Even when we have everything, we get bored, which to him is just another face of life's emptiness. So he offered another path, not total rejection of life, but also not blind immersion in it. The aesthetic path is a rare middle ground, to live without clinging, to feel without drowning, to see without desiring. It's a kind of mindful presence, not confused with instant gratification. In this sense, Schopenhauer offers a philosophy of sensitivity and quiet detachment, a yes to beauty and a no to compulsion, a yes to contemplation and a no to the noise of blind desire. He believed that great sages and great artists came close to this final liberation from the will. They weren't driven by ambition, pride, or the urge to dominate. They lived with an active neutrality, present in the world, but not consumed by it. So aesthetic contemplation isn't a luxury, it's a spiritual need. In a world that pushes us towards speed, pressure, and distraction, learning to contemplate is an act of resistance. It's saying, I'm not just a tool for production, I am a being who feels, sees, and is moved by wonder. The world is my representation. Schopenhauer. That famous line reveals something profound. The way we experience the world depends on the state of our mind, and art trains our perception. It teaches us to see what's beautiful, tragic, or essential, without needing to grab, buy, or use it. That's why, for Schopenhauer, enjoying life means finding beauty even in a world full of pain, not as an illusion, but as a deeper truth. A truth that doesn't deny suffering, but transcends it through form, harmony, and expression. Why are we taught to deny life? Why, from a young age, are we told to repress our instincts, our creative urges, and our strongest desires? Why do we associate pleasure with guilt, strength with arrogance, and freedom with danger? Friedrich Nietzsche, the philosopher with a hammer, refused to accept those questions as natural. He saw them as signs of a deep moral illness, a tradition that, for centuries, trained people to renounce life in the name of values that, in his view, suffocate the most vital parts of who we are. Morality is the great pretender. It claims to protect life, but actually poisons it. On the genealogy of morals, Nietzsche was perhaps the harshest critic of Western morality, especially the Judeo-Christian tradition that shaped the West for the last 2,000 years. He believed this morality was built on resentment, a reaction of the weak against the strong, the oppressed against the creators, the powerless against the powerful. The result? A complete reversal of values. Everything that was once strength, affirmation, creativity, pleasure, and freedom became labeled as sin, selfishness, or evil. Meanwhile, submission, humility, self-denial, and suffering were elevated as virtues. Nietzsche called this the slave morality, a system not built to celebrate life, but to control it. It gave rise to a culture that teaches people to hate themselves, to distrust their own instincts, to fear their bodies, to see suffering as redemption and life as a valley of tears. Can you see how that's still happening today? How many times have you heard that wanting too much is wrong? That thinking about yourself is selfish? That suffering purifies you? That giving up pleasure is noble? Nietzsche would look at all of this and ask, who benefits from your castration? Nietzsche didn't want to destroy morality just for the sake of it. He wanted to show that there are two kinds of morality, one that denies life and one that affirms it. And the first one is everywhere. He called this life-denying system ascetic morality, the kind that glorifies suffering, extreme self-control, denial of pleasure, and suppression of instinct. Its ideal figures are the saint, the martyr, the penitent, people who reject the world, reject the body, reject desire. The morality of the weak turned I can't into I don't want to, and then into you shouldn't. On the genealogy of morals, in other words, those who couldn't embrace life turned their weakness into a moral value and forced everyone else to follow it. Strength became a sin, freedom became a threat. Living intensely started to seem dangerous, immoral, or destructive. To Nietzsche, this is a perversion of human nature because life, at its core, is will to power, a creative drive, an overflowing force, a push to affirm and express. We weren't born to stay quiet, shrink ourselves, and apologize for existing. We're here to create, to dance, to express the unique energy we carry. But culture, shaped by centuries of moral training, teaches us the opposite. We're told to fear our own freedom, to seek safety, approval, obedience, to accept a tamed, standardized, risk-free existence. And Nietzsche asks, with both rage and compassion, is that really living, or just numb survival? Nietzsche offers a radical alternative to the morality of denial, the morality of affirmation. He doesn't want a life ruled by guilt and repression, but a life that's creative, tragic, and joyful. This is the ethic of the Übermensch, the overhuman, someone who rises above inherited values and creates their own. Someone who says yes to life in all its forms, joy and pain, light and shadow, pleasure and loss, For Nietzsche, the ethical ideal isn't moral perfection, it's existential fullness. Become who you are, that's the great task. Ecce homo. Becoming who you are takes courage, because it means breaking away from the morality we inherited. It means owning your freedom, your body, your desires. It also means embracing pain, failure, and impermanence, not as punishments, but as part of life's dance. Nietzsche doesn't reject suffering. He transforms it into creative energy. His goal isn't to erase pain, but to turn it into power. The artist, the philosopher, the free spirit, these are the people who know how to suffer well. They don't become bitter or vengeful. They transform their pain into something beautiful. One must still have chaos within to give birth to a dancing star. Mao, thus spoke Zarathustra. Maybe. Nietzsche's most radical idea is the eternal return. The idea that you would have to live your life exactly as it is, again and again, without changing anything. This is an ethical test. It asks, are you living in a way you'd be willing to repeat forever? Or are you just enduring, delaying, obeying? If your answer is no, Nietzsche challenges you to change, not to please anyone, but to affirm your life in a real, authentic way. The eternal return isn't a belief. It's an existential provocation. Are you living a life that's truly worth living? Nietzsche doesn't sugarcoat life. He sees it as hard, chaotic, and unpredictable. But he also sees it as beautiful, vibrant, and full of creative fire. His idea of happiness isn't some fake, polished smile. It's a tragic joy, the kind that stares into the abyss and still dances on its edge. His philosophy asks us to let go of old dogmas, the shoulds, the sins, the inherited guilt. It asks us to stop waiting for permission to live, to stop apologizing for who we are. It calls us to take full responsibility for our existence, not as a burden, but as freedom. Love your fate. That is, in the end, the only real freedom. Nietzsche offers us a fierce invitation to live fully. He doesn't promise comfort. He offers courage. Courage to think for yourself, to feel with your own body, to live with your own blood. Courage to be whole. And you? Are you still living under the weight of inherited morality? Are you trying to fit into values that no longer make sense? Or are you ready to say yes to life with everything it brings? Nietzsche doesn't teach us how to be happy. He teaches us something deeper, how to live with authenticity, with power, with truth, because a life denied might be correct, but only a life affirmed can ever be complete. Human beings are born good, but society corrupts them. This is one of Jean-Jacques Rousseau's most famous quotes, and also one of the most misunderstood. Rousseau isn't calling for a naive return to the wilderness. Instead, he's inviting us to think deeply about who we become when we live in society, and how education, instead of freeing us, often traps us. Man is born free, and everywhere he is in chains. The social contract Rousseau wasn't against civilization itself. What he criticized was the type of civilization we've built, one that values appearance over essence, status over virtue, accumulation over being. His criticism is especially clear when it comes to education. For Rousseau, the way we educate children shapes the kind of human beings they will become. And modern education, shaped by social, economic, and political interests, doesn't raise free individuals. It raises domesticated ones. In Rousseau's view, a human in their natural state lives in harmony with their needs, emotions, and the world around them. They aren't corrupted by artificial desires. They don't live to impress others or depend on outside validation. But once they enter society, that natural being is forced to adapt to social rules. They learn to compete, to please, to win, to obey, to hide. They start wanting what others want, chasing approval, comparing themselves. And in doing so, they lose touch with who they really are. Nature wants children to be children before they become adults. Emile, or on education. That's why Rousseau was so critical of the education system of his time, and in many ways, ours today. Schools, he believed, don't teach people how to live. They teach them how to conform. They train obedient citizens for the job market, for social hierarchy, for following rules. But they don't teach them how to think for themselves, how to feel authentically, how to live freely. The result? Adults who are disconnected from themselves. People who don't really know what they want. People who live according to external expectations, so well adjusted to their social mask that they no longer realize they're wearing one. In response, Rousseau wrote Émile, or On Education, one of the most influential texts in educational philosophy. There, he proposed a radically different kind of learning, one that follows the child's natural development, respects their pace, and honors their curiosity. The core idea is this: children should be protected from society's early corruption. They should learn not to compete or memorize facts, but to observe, to experiment, to feel, and to understand the world through their own experience. In this vision, the teacher isn't a dispenser of knowledge, but a guide who helps the child grow freely. The first and most important tool of education is example. Rousseau education, for Rousseau, should raise free people, not just useful workers. And freedom isn't just about doing whatever you want. It's about developing an ethical and authentic sense of self. Only then can someone live in community without losing their individuality. This type of education aims to reconnect us with our nature, not in a biological sense, but in an existential one. Rousseau's nature is that part of us that is spontaneous, honest, and whole. It's this part that modern society, with its vanity and vices, represses from childhood. Rousseau's critique goes beyond schools. It's aimed at the structure of society itself. In works like Discourse on the Origin of Inequality, he shows how civilization creates endless systems of comparison, competition, and vanity that take us further away from who we truly are. We become weak, fearful, servile, and flattering. Life in society teaches us to perform, not to be. Discourse on inequality. For Rousseau, inequality isn't natural. It comes from property, vanity, and social comparison. And education, instead of protecting us from this, prepares us to play the same cruel game, to succeed in a world that rewards image and ignores character. That's why modern education alienates us from ourselves. It teaches us to obey, to compete for meaningless rewards, to fit into a sick world. And the more successful we are in this system, the further we get from our true selves. But Rousseau wasn't a pessimist. He believed it's possible to resist this, to reclaim authenticity. And that starts with a deep transformation of education and culture, an education that promotes freedom, moral feeling, and connection with nature. This return isn't literal. Rousseau wasn't asking us to live in the forest. He wanted us to recognize what we've lost: simplicity, wholeness, the ability to feel life as it is, not just how we're told it should be. His ideas predicted many modern problems: loss of meaning, information overload, the loneliness of city life, and the gap between social success and personal fulfillment. If you're searching for a more meaningful, connected, and honest life, Rousseau still has a lot to say. In a way, he's asking us to unlearn, to question what we were taught as absolute, to doubt social morals, imposed rules, ready-made ideals, to turn inward and ask ourselves, is this really true? Is this really mine? Does this make sense to me? That's the quiet revolution Rousseau offers, raising people who are, first and foremost, human, who think, feel, and act based on real experience, not on scripts handed down to them, who live with simplicity and depth without being swallowed by the social spectacle. The truly free person wants only what they can and does only what they should. Émile for Rousseau, education decides the future of humanity. It's not enough to train professionals. We need to raise free, aware, and compassionate people. Because only a whole human being can build a just society. And you? Have you been living according to your true nature, or according to what others expect of you? Are you shaping your own awareness, or just repeating what you were taught? What's still alive, spontaneous, and real inside of you? Maybe the answer lies in the one place society least wants you to look, within yourself. Why are we so afraid of silence? Why do we surround ourselves with noise, distractions, to-do lists, notifications, endless conversations? Why does being alone, with nothing to do, often make us feel almost unbearably uncomfortable? For Blaise Pascal, a 17th century philosopher and mathematician, the answer is simple and uncomfortable. We're afraid of ourselves. And more than anything, we're afraid to face the emptiness of existence. All of humanity's problems stem from one thing: not knowing how to sit quietly, alone, in a room. This might be Pascal's most powerful and relevant quote today. Found in his unfinished work, Pensées, Thoughts, it introduces a deep idea. Humans use entertainment as a way to escape, a way to avoid facing life's biggest questions. Who am I? Where am I going? What is death? Why do I exist? Instead of facing these questions, we distract ourselves. Pascal called this divertissement, which in French means both entertainment and diversion. In other words, it's not just about having fun, it's about avoiding something. And what we're avoiding is the discomfort of simply existing. Pascal wasn't an optimist. His view of human nature was deeply realistic. He believed we are contradictory beings, both great and miserable. Great, because we can think about the infinite and reflect on our own mortality. Miserable, because we live in fragile bodies, in a temporary world, surrounded by doubt, pain, and death. Man is but a reed, the weakest in nature, but he is a thinking reed. This awareness of our own mortality is overwhelming for most people. Knowing we'll die, that everything passes, and that the universe is indifferent to our existence creates a kind of emptiness that's hard to face. And that's where entertainment steps in. Pascal noticed that instead of pausing, reflecting, and dealing with these truths, we run away into constant activity. We overwork, chase success, indulge in pleasure, watch endless content, get into arguments, create goals, all to avoid the silence of being. Today, this escape is easier than ever. One tap on a screen, and we can avoid even a second of solitude. We're always connected, and often completely disconnected from ourselves. Pascal didn't condemn pleasure or fun. What he criticized was the constant, unconscious use of entertainment as an escape from existence. He noticed that even kings, people who had everything, constantly sought distractions. Not because they were bored, but because they were scared of the void. If a man were truly happy with power, he wouldn't need all the noise and distraction. It's not about what you're doing to distract yourself. It's about why you're doing it. Entertainment becomes a way to keep your mind busy and away from what really matters. Pascal warns us about living a life entirely focused on avoiding reality, and his warning feels more relevant than ever. We live in a culture of non-stop entertainment. Free time is no longer used for rest, reflection, or self-discovery. It's packed with endless, fast, shallow content. Every quiet moment is instantly filled, and deep thinking gets cut off. People would rather chase distractions than face what could actually save them. Pascal wasn't a nihilist. He didn't believe life was meaningless. In fact, he believed that emptiness points to something greater, a forgotten spiritual dimension. As a Christian thinker, he saw our discomfort as a sign of God's absence. But even if you don't share his faith, his analysis still holds up. The emptiness we feel is a clue that something important is being ignored. And instead of confronting it, we run, as if avoiding the big questions could somehow make them go away. The cost of this constant escape: a shallow life. A life built on distractions lacks depth, meaning, and real joy. Everything becomes noise. Everything is fast, forgettable, empty. There is a God-shaped void in the heart of man, which nothing can fill except God himself. Even if you don't agree with Pascal's religious conclusion, the structure of his thinking is hard to deny. People feel like something's missing and try to fill that hole with things that have no substance. And that leads to frustration, burnout, and modern-day depression. Pascal's suggestion isn't to eliminate all forms of entertainment. He's saying we need to learn how to stop, to sit with silence, to be okay without constant stimulation, to face who we are, what we fear, and what we're missing. That kind of confrontation is difficult, but freeing, because only when we stop running can we start searching for real answers. The emptiness, if faced with courage, doesn't have to destroy us. It can change us. Today, that's a radical act. In a world obsessed with speed and distraction, taking time to think has become a form of resistance. Turning off your phone, being alone for a few minutes, listening to your own thoughts. It's almost a revolutionary act. And Pascal would say, that's where real life begins, because only those who face the emptiness can fill it with something true. Only those who silence the noise can hear what really matters. Only those who stop running can find meaning that doesn't depend on external stimulation. The eternal silence of these infinite spaces terrifies me. Pascal. This poetic and haunting quote captures the human dilemma. We are finite beings facing an infinite universe. We're aware of the abyss, and we crave meaning. Most people run from it, but a few, the brave ones, face the abyss and turn it into wisdom. And you? Are you running, or are you willing to stop? Are you just distracting yourself, or are you listening? Are you simply filling your time, or are you giving it meaning? Pascal calls us back to what matters. He reminds us that real entertainment isn't about escaping life. It's about learning to live it deeply. Amid the scholarly treatises, theological debates, and abstract systems that defined the 16th century, a radically different voice emerged. Intimate, honest, deeply human. That voice belonged to Michel de Montaigne, a French philosopher and author of the famous essays. While many spoke about life in theoretical terms, Montaigne had the boldness to ask, how do we actually live well? A well-made head is better than a well-filled one. That simple sentence is a quiet revolution. It captures Montaigne's critique of an education that values knowledge without wisdom, information without meaning, technique without ethics. For him, gathering knowledge isn't enough. We have to learn how to live. And that kind of learning, he realized, is neglected by both schools and culture. Montaigne created a new way of thinking, not systematic, but experiential. He didn't write manuals or doctrines, but essays, personal reflections, open-ended thoughts, sometimes even contradictory. Rather than impose ideas, he tested them. He examined himself, shared doubts, and explored life through lived experience. That's why he's considered the father of modern thinking on self-knowledge. Not as empty introspection, but as existential work. For Montaigne, understanding yourself is the first step to understanding the world. And to live well, you must first be true to your own experience. I am the subject of my book, Montaigne. That line isn't just a literary device, it's a philosophical declaration. When Montaigne writes about himself, he's not trying to be a role model, he's holding up a mirror. He shows that life's biggest questions are hidden in everyday moments. Fear of death, human relationships, the passage of time, the search for meaning. That's why he broke away from the idea of the philosopher as cold, distant, and purely logical. Montaigne offered a new image of the philosopher, someone real, vulnerable, contradictory, human, someone who doesn't just think, but feels, who makes mistakes, changes their mind, has doubts, and who, maybe because of all that, has something real to offer. One of the main targets of his critique was the education system of his time, which ironically looks a lot like ours today. Montaigne saw schools producing repeaters, not thinkers. Students trained to memorize formulas, pile up facts, impress with words. But who didn't know how to choose, how to live, or how to simply be. The soul needs to be trained to judge, not just to remember. That's the heart of his philosophy of education. To teach people how to judge. To teach them to think for themselves, to figure out what truly matters. To act with wisdom when life gets messy. The real educator, for Montaigne, isn't someone who gives you answers. It's someone who shapes your character. Not someone who tells you what to think, but someone who helps you want to think. For Montaigne, the goal of education is autonomy, and that means preparing people to deal with existence, with its uncertainties, its contradictions, and its inevitable challenges. A school that teaches how to live can't ignore death, love, fear, or failure. On the contrary, those are the core lessons. This idea came centuries before it would be picked up again by existential philosophers, humanistic psychologists, and critical educators. Montaigne was ahead of his time when he said, "Philosophy should touch life. If it doesn't help us live better, what's the point?" One of the most frequent themes in his essays is death. Not out of morbidity, but out of wisdom. For Montaigne, reflecting on death is the key to living with more presence, more honesty, and more peace. To philosophize is to learn how to die. That echoes the Stoics, whom Montaigne admired. But in his hands, the idea feels more intimate, more grounded. He didn't want some heroic preparation for death. He wanted a calm, realistic relationship with it. Knowing that we're going to die frees us from fake urgencies. It helps us focus on what truly matters. It teaches us to value our time. Today, we live in a culture that avoids talking about death, that runs from it as if we could somehow escape it. Montaigne would call that an educational failure. By ignoring the topic, we raise anxious people, insecure people, people stuck chasing hollow goals. When in reality, being aware of death is a powerful ally in living an authentic life. Another major lesson from Montaigne is balance. He was skeptical of extremes, of absolute certainties, of one-size-fits-all truths. For him, life calls for moderation, flexibility, and common sense. The wise person isn't the one who never fails. It's the one who knows how to adapt without losing themselves. That includes accepting our own contradictions. Montaigne contradicts himself in his essays, and he's totally fine with it, because life is contradictory. Our emotions shift, our perspectives evolve, our bodies change. Expecting perfect consistency from a human being is unrealistic. True wisdom means walking alongside life with clarity and honesty. I don't correct myself, I transform. Montaigne. That one line is a cure for moral rigidity. Montaigne believed in a kind of ethics rooted in growth, not punishment. Making mistakes is part of being human. What matters is not hiding from our errors, but learning from them. Teaching people how to live means teaching them how to fall, how to get back up, how to grow, and how to laugh at themselves. Montaigne's philosophy is more than 400 years old, but it feels like it was written for today. In a world obsessed with speed, productivity, and surface-level success, he reminds us of the value of inner time, self-awareness, and a thoughtful life. He invites us to look inward without fear, to be gentler with our flaws, to search for a life that's honest, not just efficient. His vision of philosophy is the opposite of dry academic theory. It's a philosophy that walks with us, that sits with our doubts, that doesn't try to convince us, but to wake us up. A philosophy that doesn't lecture, but helps us bloom. And that kind of philosophy needs to start in education. An education that forms not just specialists, but full human beings. That doesn't just train minds, but shapes souls. That gives people back the right to think for themselves, to feel the world deeply, and to build a life that means something. And you? Have you been learning how to live, or just checking off tasks? Have you stayed true to your own experience, or just met other people's expectations? Are you shaping your mind, or just stuffing it with information? Montaigne would say, start with yourself. Watch yourself. Listen to yourself. Accept yourself. And then, live. Do you know who you are? Not your name, your job, or your social roles, but who you are deep down when everything around you is silent. Have you ever stopped to really listen to yourself? Have you had the courage to face your own existence without distractions? If your answer is no, you might be living in despair and not even know it. That's the bold message of Søren Kierkegaard, a 19th century Danish philosopher and one of the founding voices of modern existentialism. For him, the greatest tragedy in human life isn't physical pain or material lack, but something deeper and more subtle, being disconnected from yourself. The greatest danger is not that man might lose his life, but that he might lose himself while still alive. The sickness. Unto death, Kierkegaard doesn't describe despair as loud or dramatic. It's often silent and ordinary, living without authenticity, avoiding yourself, and being afraid of the freedom that life demands. Despair, for him, is living a life that isn't really yours, just going through the motions, following expectations, and never asking the big questions. Most people live in such deep despair that they're not even aware of it. The sickness unto death. This is his central critique. We're constantly distracted, working, studying, scrolling, planning. But all of that can be a mask, a way to avoid the essential question, who am I? And that question, Kierkegaard says, can only be answered by you. Unlike the rationalist tradition that puts logic above all else, Kierkegaard brings the spotlight to personal experience, anguish, freedom, and the act of choosing. For him, to live without reflecting on your own existence is to live in quiet despair. Life can only be understood backwards, but it must be lived forwards. Living well, then, starts with a conscious choice, to reflect honestly on your life, not as an abstract idea, but as a personal and emotional question. Am I living as who I really am, or just what others expect? Are my choices authentic, or just easy? Am I avoiding something inside me? For Kierkegaard, a life without reflection is where the soul starts to wither. Without self-awareness, we become spectators of our own lives, reacting, not choosing, copying, not creating, existing, but not truly living. And worse yet, our education system completely ignores this. Kierkegaard saw a problem that still exists today. We're taught everything except how to live. School teaches logic, math, science, language, performance, but not how to reflect. Not how to face freedom, suffering, death, love, faith, or anxiety. He asks, how can you truly educate someone without teaching what it means to be human? Without talking about the fear of choosing, the burden of freedom, and the responsibility of being yourself? Anxiety is the dizziness of freedom, the concept of anxiety. For Kierkegaard, anxiety isn't a flaw, it's a sign that we're alive. We feel it because we're free. In front of us lies a world full of choices, and that's terrifying. So many people run from it. They hide in routines, in social norms, in borrowed truths. But he insists, the only way to live authentically is to face that anxiety, to let it change you. Because only those who embrace the risk of freedom can build a life that truly means something. To Kierkegaard, we're not finished products, we're projects. We're not just given identities, we're given the task of becoming ourselves. And that requires courage, effort, and responsibility. The self is a relation that relates to itself. The sickness unto death. It sounds complicated, but it's simple. You only become who you truly are when you choose to face yourself with honesty. When you stop getting lost in the world outside and start turning inward, looking for a life that aligns with your truest self. But that's hard, because the world offers pre-packaged paths, ready-made models of success, happiness, and identity. Following them feels safer. But to Kierkegaard, that safety is fake. Running from yourself is always despair, even if it looks like stability on the outside. While Kierkegaard's ideas apply to any search for authenticity, he was also a Christian thinker. He believed that human life finds its highest meaning in a personal relationship with the Absolute, with God. But that relationship doesn't come from traditions or doctrines. It demands an existential act, the leap of faith. It's not blind faith, it's deeply conscious. A dive into the unknown, a personal decision, a commitment made in full awareness of your freedom and your fear. Even if you don't share his beliefs, his point still stands. A real life requires a real leap into what's true for you, even if it challenges logic or comfort. Faith begins where reason ends, fear and trembling. This faith, or existential leap, is Kierkegaard's answer to the human condition. Not absolute certainty, but absolute courage in the face of uncertainty. And for him, that's the opposite of despair. It's what it means to truly live, fully, freely, and by choice. What Kierkegaard offers isn't a system or a manual, it's a mirror. And in that mirror, we see what we usually avoid, that freedom is a gift, but also a burden. That real living demands real choices, that becoming yourself is the hardest and most meaningful task in life. The highest task in life is to become who you truly are. Kierkegaard. And sadly, that task isn't taught. Not in school, not in institutions, not on social media. We're taught to be efficient, polite, productive, competitive, but not to be authentic. That's why thinking with Kierkegaard is a call to inner responsibility. It's a reminder that while the world may offer paths, only you can walk your own. And that living without reflecting is the real failure. So, what about you? Have you stayed true to yourself, or just learned to fit in? Are you living a chosen life, or just following someone else's? Are you reflecting, or just repeating? Kierkegaard would say, as long as you're alive, you can still choose. And choosing to live authentically, even when it hurts, is the only victory that truly matters. We are condemned to be free. That might be the most famous and most misunderstood line from the French philosopher Jean-Paul Sartre, the leading voice of 20th century existentialism. But what does he actually mean by that? And why is freedom both a gift and a burden? Sartre asks us to face a hard truth. There's no fixed human nature, no pre-written essence, no set destiny. Every person is an open project, and it's up to each of us to define who we are through the choices we make. Man is nothing else but what he makes of himself. Existentialism is a humanism. For Sartre, life doesn't come with a manual. There's no hidden true self waiting to be found. What there is instead is radical freedom, the freedom to choose, to act, and to create meaning, even, or especially, in a world that doesn't come with built-in meaning. Here's the key. This freedom is inescapable. Even when you try not to choose, you're still choosing. Even if you let others decide for you, you're still responsible. So if freedom is that essential, why do we try so hard to avoid it? Sartre's answer: because freedom makes us anxious. It forces us to realize we are the authors of our own lives. We can't blame the gods, fate, nature, society, or our parents. It's us, our decisions, our actions, even our silence. Man is condemned to be free, condemned because he did not create himself. Yet once thrown into the world, he is responsible for everything he does. Existentialism is a humanism. That's why anxiety, for Sartre, isn't a flaw. It's a sign of maturity. It means we're aware that our lives are in our own hands, and that's terrifying. Because making real choices means giving up the illusion of guarantees. In the face of that fear, many people run. That's where one of Sartre's most important ideas comes in. Bad faith, mauvaise foi. Bad faith is when we lie to ourselves on purpose. It's when we deny our freedom to avoid the weight of making a choice. We hide behind social roles, convenient excuses, or fixed identities. We pretend we're not free, but deep down, we know we are. Bad faith is the attempt to escape the responsibility of freedom. Tant Sartre. One classic example Sartre gives is the waiter who acts like he's nothing more than a waiter. The way he moves, talks, behaves, everything seems rehearsed, as if that role defines him completely. But Sartre reminds us, no one is just their job. We are always more than any role we play. Pretending otherwise is bad faith. Another example. Someone says, "I can't do that. It's just who I am." That's turning their current state into something fixed, as if they can't change. But Sartre would say, that's avoiding the responsibility to become different. And that brings us to the core message. Living in bad faith means not truly living. It means going through life half asleep, avoiding tough decisions, dodging responsibility, ignoring our own freedom. It's like living on autopilot. You follow expectations, repeat cultural patterns, walk the normal path without ever asking, does this make sense to me? Is this how I want to live? Or am I just staying busy to avoid facing myself? Bad faith keeps us from living authentically. Life becomes a poorly rehearsed play, where we act out who we think we should be and forget to ask who we want to be. That's why recognizing your freedom, even if it makes you anxious, is the only path to a meaningful life. If there's no fixed human essence, then everything we are comes from what we choose to be. That means life doesn't come with meaning. You have to build it. And for Sartre, that's an ethical task. Every choice we make reflects what we value. And because there are no absolute values handed down by some higher power or nature, we become the creators of meaning. And more than that, when we choose something, we're saying this is what we think matters for all people. Choice is personal and at the same time universal. That's a huge responsibility, and many people don't want it. They prefer bad faith, alienation, conformity. But Sartre challenges us. Are you living a life you chose, or just the life you inherited? Sartre doesn't romanticize freedom. He places it in the real world, where there are no promises of happiness, no ready-made scripts, no built-in meaning. That might sound bleak, but for him, it's actually a huge opportunity. Existence precedes essence. Sartre. That means we exist first and define ourselves later. We're thrown into life with no fixed purpose, but with the power to create one. And that's what makes human existence so unique. We can reinvent ourselves, start over, and build something new. But that's only possible if we recognize our freedom and accept the anxiety that comes with it. Sartre calls for an existentialism that's active, engaged, and ethical. He doesn't want a philosophy of despair, but one of responsibility. Owning your freedom isn't a punishment. It's taking authorship of your own story. That doesn't guarantee success or constant happiness, but it gives you something deeper, a life that's truly yours. A life where you act, not just react. Where you choose, not just go along. Where you live as a subject, not as an object. Life has no meaning a priori. It is up to you to give it a meaning. And Sartre. That's what Sartre is really saying. Life is yours, and only you can make it worthwhile. So what about you? Have you been hiding behind excuses, letting others choose for you, living a life you decided on, or one you're just repeating? Sartre would say, truly living isn't about feeling good all the time. It's about awareness. It's about facing the weight of freedom and turning it into something creative. It's about making your life a work in progress, shaped by your choices. Because running from freedom is living in bad faith, but facing it, even if it hurts, is the first real step toward living. Life is absurd. That simple yet unsettling statement sits at the core of Albert Camus' thinking, one of the most influential philosophers and writers of the 20th century. But what exactly does he mean by that? That life has no value? That everything is empty and meaningless? Not quite. For Camus, life is absurd, not because it lacks meaning, but because human beings need meaning, while the universe, in all its silent vastness, offers no answers. This disconnect between our deep search for meaning and the indifference of the world is what Camus calls The absurd. The absurd is born from this confrontation between the human need and the unreasonable silence of the world. The myth of Sisyphus. Humans are by nature beings who ask questions. Why do I exist? What's the purpose of pain? What happens after death? What's the point of all this? But life doesn't respond. The world doesn't come with guarantees or absolute truths. Everything feels temporary, uncertain, relative. Death is certain, but meaning, if it exists, is not obvious. And here's the hard part. Camus makes us face. When we become aware of the absurd, we're confronted with a kind of inner and outer emptiness, a silence that echoes through everything. The first instinct is to run from it through religion, distractions, ideologies, or just going along with the crowd. But Camus rejects all escape routes. There is no fate that cannot be overcome by scorn. The myth of Sisyphus. Instead of running from the absurd, he proposes something braver, facing it head-on, accepting its presence, and paradoxically, learning to live with it, and even from it. Camus sees in the Greek myth of Sisyphus a perfect symbol of human life. Sisyphus was condemned by the gods to endlessly roll a boulder up a mountain, only to watch it roll back down again and again. A pointless, never-ending task, no finish line, no glory. This image reflects our daily lives, waking up, working, meeting responsibilities, going to sleep, and doing it all over again. Life can often feel like a repetitive, meaningless loop, and so Camus asks the most radical question of all. If life is absurd, why not just commit suicide? But his answer surprises us. Camus says suicide is a form of surrender, a way of saying we can't handle life's lack of meaning. For him, that's unacceptable. The real challenge isn't to run from the absurd, it's to see it clearly and still choose to live. The absurd is the lucid reason that sees its own limits. The myth of Sisyphus. Faced with absurdity, Camus calls for revolt. Not a violent or angry revolt, but a deep, personal stance of resistance. A yes to life, even with no guarantees. A commitment to existence, not because it gives meaning, but because we can give it beauty, depth, and dignity. Revolt is the certainty of a crushing fate, without the resignation that should go with it. The rebel. To revolt, for Camus, is to reject escape, and instead embrace life as it is, incomplete, imperfect, full of unanswered questions, and yet overflowing with possibility. It's choosing to live without illusions, but with presence, freedom, and awareness. That's the ethic of the absurd, to live fully without lying to yourself, to love, create, struggle, laugh, suffer, knowing it's all temporary. And because it's temporary, it's precious. Camus flips the usual script. For most people, enjoying life means avoiding discomfort, staying distracted, or numbing your thoughts. But for him, enjoying life means looking at it with open eyes, not hiding from our human condition, but embracing it. And that kind of clarity, far from depressing, can actually be freeing. Because once we accept that there's no pre-made meaning to find, we realize we're free to build our own. That forces us to live with more responsibility, more honesty, more intensity. To live is to keep the absurd alive. The absurd depends as much on man as on the world. The myth of Sisyphus. In other words, experiencing the absurd doesn't paralyze you. It activates you. It demands a new attitude toward life, one of presence, courage, and freedom. Camus also sees art as one of the highest forms of this revolt. The absurd artist doesn't pretend to have all the answers. Instead, they explore the human experience in all its messiness. They create without illusions, but with passion. Their work says, nothing lasts forever, but it's still worth creating. To create is to live twice. The myth of Sisyphus. Here's one of Camus' deepest lessons. Life isn't valuable because of what it promises. It's valuable because of what it allows. We have no guarantees, but we do have now. We have the chance to love, to create, to choose, to find beauty, even knowing everything will eventually pass. That's the wisdom of the absurd. Not to deny pain, not to run from the void, but to move through it with clarity and dignity. Camus knew this way of living isn't something we're taught. Traditional education doesn't prepare us for the absurd. It teaches formulas, dates, job skills, but not how to face emptiness. It doesn't teach what to do when nothing seems to make sense. It doesn't show us how to deal with death, loss, or the silence of the universe. And yet, this might be life's most important skill: learning to live without knowing why, owning the freedom to create meaning where there is none, making a moment matter, not because it lasts, but because it's yours. Camus teaches us, with grace and courage, that clarity is not the enemy of joy. In fact, true joy is only possible when we accept life as it truly is, and stop demanding that it be something else. And you? Are you waiting for a ready-made meaning, or are you creating your own? Are you running from the absurd, or learning to live inside it with dignity? Are you looking for guarantees, or showing up fully in the present? Camus would say, live like Sisyphus, but with a smile. Because even while pushing the boulder, greatness lies in not giving up. We must imagine Sisyphus happy. Camus, The Myth of Sisyphus. Are you really living the time you have? Or does it feel like your days are being used up, repeated, spent, with barely any time left just to be? That question feels more relevant than ever, and it finds one of its strongest answers in Karl Marx's theory of alienation. Far beyond political stereotypes, Marx was a deep thinker about the human condition, and maybe one of the first to show how work, instead of being something meaningful, has turned into a kind of existential prison. The more wealth the worker produces, the poorer he becomes. Economic and Philosophical Manuscripts, 1844. This paradox sums up the heart of alienation. Marx realized that in industrial capitalism, humans stop being the subjects of their own work and instead become just a small part of a much bigger system. We produce a lot, but not for ourselves. We work more and more, but feel less and less in control of our own lives. So, what does alienation mean? The word comes from the Latin alienus, to become a stranger. And for Marx, a modern worker is alienated when they become a stranger to themselves. This happens when you don't choose what you do or how you do it. You don't control what you make or who it's for. You don't see yourself in what you produce. And above all, you feel like you work only to survive. In other words, work, which could be an outlet for creativity and life expression, becomes something that drains you instead of fulfilling you. We spend our best hours, energy, and focus to keep a system running that gives us very little back in terms of meaning. Work is no longer a need being fulfilled, but just a way to fulfill needs outside of work. Marx. This message is more relevant today than ever. We live in a time where free time is rare, burnout is common, and exhaustion feels like the norm. We work for the promise of a better future, but often sacrifice the present for a someday that never comes. Marx breaks alienation into four main types. 1. Alienation from the product. You don't own what you create. It belongs to the boss, the company, the market. Workers build the world, but don't get to live in it. 2. Alienation from the process. The way you work is forced on you. Time is strictly controlled. Tasks are repetitive. There's no space for creativity or freedom. Work becomes suffering, not living. 3. Alienation from our human nature. Marx believed humans are the only species capable of transforming the world consciously. But under capitalism, that ability is denied. Work no longer expresses our humanity. It reduces us to functions. 4. Alienation from others and from ourselves. Competition separates workers. People become threats to each other, and identity becomes fragmented. We don't know who we are outside of what we do, Man's alienation from his work is the alienation from himself as a human being. Marx. For Marx, time is a key part of this alienation. Lifetime, which should be used for love, learning, rest, creativity, is taken by capital. We sell our time, and with it, we sell our existence. Time is the space for human development. But under capitalism, the worker's time belongs to someone else, a Marx. Think about how many hours of your day are truly yours. How many are spent working, commuting, recovering from exhaustion? How much time is left for people you love, for thinking, for creating, for simply existing? Marx would say, the system has hijacked your time, and with it, it's taken your awareness. A lot of people believe work is a choice. No one is forcing you. But Marx warns, when survival depends on a paycheck, freedom is an illusion. We don't choose if we work, only where. And even that choice is limited by education, location, social status, and personal circumstances. So the system creates the appearance of freedom while keeping the same power structures in place. This fake freedom is part of what Marx called ideology, a set of beliefs that justify alienation and hide its true causes. We're told we're free, that success is just a matter of hard work, that struggle is personal. But in reality, the system shapes how we live, think, and even dream. The result? A life held back, an existence reduced to performance, a mind overwhelmed, a tired body, a numb heart. Capitalism turns being into having, and having into appearing. Humans stop being the goal and become the means, a means for profit, for productivity, for keeping a machine running that benefits only a few. And what's lost in all this? The chance to live a free, full, and meaningful life. But Marx wasn't just pointing fingers, he was calling for change. He believed alienation isn't destiny, it can be overcome. But first, we need to wake up, to break the illusion that this system is just the way things are, to see that the world we live in is not the only one possible. Marx's philosophy wasn't meant to sit on a bookshelf. It was meant to drive action. Real change starts when we reclaim our lives, our time, our work, our relationships, our ability to create. Philosophers have only interpreted the world in various ways. The point, however, is to change it. Marx, that transformation starts when we realize that life can't be reduced to production, that we're worth more than our output, that living well isn't about consuming more, it's about reclaiming our lost time. And you? Do you feel like your days are being used, but not really lived? Do you have time to be, or only time to do? Are you working to live, or living just to work? Marx reminds us that freedom isn't just personal, it's structural, and as long as profit is more important than life, our existence will always be incomplete. But it doesn't have to stay that way. Awareness can become resistance. Resistance can become action, and action can open the door to a life that's truly lived. Why do we feel guilty for wanting things? Why does something that brings us pleasure often come with a sense of regret, shame, or the feeling that we shouldn't? Why is it so hard to just enjoy life? For Sigmund Freud, the father of psychoanalysis, the answer lies inside us, but it didn't start there. From a young age, we're shaped by rules, norms, and expectations that tell us how to behave, what to feel, and even how to think. Over time, these outside rules become internal ones, buried in our minds as repression. Civilization demands sacrifices, and personal happiness pays the price. Civilization and its discontents. This is Freud's central idea. Society is built on the repression of desire. In order for civilization to function, with order, laws, and social harmony, humans must suppress their natural impulses, especially those linked to sexuality and aggression. But this suppression comes at a cost. We lose spontaneity, full pleasure, and inner freedom. Freud changed the way we understand the mind by showing that not everything we think or feel is conscious. There's a deeper part of us, the unconscious, where repressed desires, fears, fantasies, and past traumas live. And those things don't go away just because we ignore them. In fact, they come back, but in disguise. They return as anxiety, irrational fears, strange dreams, emotional blocks, and physical symptoms. Psychoanalysis teaches that what doesn't get expressed ends up twisted. Buried desires find other ways out, and often they hurt. The ego is not master in its own house. Freud. This famous quote shows a tough truth. We are not fully free. We carry inner senses we've learned through life, especially from social morals that label things as right or wrong, good or bad, honorable or shameful, the superego. Our inner judge Freud described the mind as having three parts: the id, the ego, and the superego. The id is the part of us that wants pleasure now. It doesn't care about consequences or limits. The ego is the rational part. It tries to balance what we want with what's actually possible. The superego is our inner voice of judgment. It comes from parents, religion, school, and culture. The superego acts like an internal judge. It criticizes, punishes, and pushes us to chase impossible ideals. It's what makes us feel guilty for wanting something that isn't allowed. It represses, not because the desire is harmful, but because it isn't socially acceptable. The superego is the heir of the Oedipus complex. Freud. All this inner repression creates tension and suffering. We want things, but we feel we can't. We desire, but we judge ourselves. And in the end, we often don't even know what we truly want anymore. In Civilization and Its Discontents, Freud explains how living in society means giving up parts of ourselves. Free sexuality, open aggression, childlike spontaneity, all of it must be controlled to keep peace and order. But that control creates suffering. And this suffering is the modern discomfort Freud described. A low-grade, ongoing unease we can't always explain. He believed society itself causes neurosis. Civilization is built on the frustration of instincts. Freud. The promise of culture is order, safety, and progress. But the cost is disconnection from key parts of ourselves. That's why Freud still matters. He showed that modern unhappiness doesn't come only from lacking things. It comes from symbolic repression. Psychoanalysis reveals that enjoying life is an idea constantly sabotaged by the superego. Even when we have time for fun, pleasure, or rest, we often can't fully enjoy it. Guilt shows up. Anxiety creeps in. A voice inside says, "You should be working. This is wrong. This is dangerous." We live caught between desire and fear, and sometimes we learn to deny what we want before we even understand it. We become experts at holding back and strangers to our own bodies, pleasure, and true wants. But Freud didn't say we should just give in to every impulse. Instead, he called for a possible reconciliation with desire. Mental health for Freud comes from recognizing and integrating what's been repressed. The unconscious can't be erased, but it can be heard. And when it's heard, desire can be shaped, expressed, and lived with more freedom. Psychoanalysis doesn't cure in the usual way. It helps people speak and hear themselves. Through speaking, the unconscious reveals itself. Hidden desires come to light. And slowly, the mind becomes less of a prison. Where the id was, their ego shall be. Freud. This is the goal of analysis, to bring the unconscious into awareness, to face our desires, to understand where our symptoms come from, to let go of internal rules that no longer serve us, and to live with more autonomy, less controlled by patterns we didn't choose. Freud teaches us that desire isn't the problem. The problem is how we repress it without understanding it. When we explore desire, it becomes creative energy. It can be the source of art, love, thought, connection. It can bring life back to life. But culture taught us to fear desire, to treat it as dangerous, shameful, or forbidden. So we learn not to want, or we learn to want only what's approved, sold, or tamed. This systematic repression hasn't made us better people. It's made us more divided. And many modern issues, anxiety, depression, eating disorders, addiction, numbness, come from this split between what we feel and what we're allowed to feel. So ask yourself, are you in touch with your desires, or just going through the motions? Do you live with inner freedom, or under constant mental surveillance? Do you know what you really want, or just what you're supposed to want? Freud doesn't give easy answers, but he does offer us a mirror and an invitation. Listen to yourself. Listen to what's been silenced. Desire isn't the enemy of life. It's often the very thing that brings it to life. No one is born a woman. One becomes a woman. That sentence, written by Simone de Beauvoir in The Second Sex, 1949, forever changed philosophical, feminist, and existential thinking. In just a few words, it reveals a deep truth. What we understand as feminine isn't something natural, it's something shaped, and this shaping has real consequences for women's freedom. Beauvoir was one of the first thinkers to connect existentialism with gender critique. Influenced by Jean-Paul Sartre, her intellectual partner, she embraced the idea that humans are not defined by any fixed essence. We become who we are through our choices and actions. Freedom is the core of human existence, but as she shows, that freedom is not equally distributed. The problem of woman has always been a problem of men. The Second Sex Beauvoir starts with an uncomfortable truth. From a very young age, women are taught to give themselves up. They are trained to please, to care, to obey, to give in. They are not raised for autonomy, but for adaptation. The male world is the world of action, creation, transcendence. The female world, on the other hand, is shaped as one of passivity, sacrifice, and repetition. This difference doesn't come from biology, it comes from how the body is interpreted by culture. Biology doesn't define a woman's destiny, but it's used as justification to place her in a secondary role. Pregnancy, menstruation, motherhood, while natural, are turned into reasons to limit her. Woman is defined in relation to man, not as herself. The Second Sex Society builds a gender structure where the man is the universal subject, the one who acts, chooses, builds, and names. The woman becomes the other, the one who follows, supports, and serves. And this role of being the other is taught, reinforced, and internalized throughout life. Beauvoir argues that gender conditioning begins in childhood. Girls are taught to be sweet, pretty, obedient, emotionally available. They learn to prepare for others, not for themselves. And when they become adults, they carry a long history of silence, self-sacrifice, and suppressed will. All of women's education is aimed at stopping her pursuit of autonomy. The second sex. While boys are encouraged to explore, take risks, think, and invent, girls are monitored, controlled, and directed toward marriage, motherhood, and care. That's not neutral. It's an existential loss, a limitation on what they could be, create, and desire. Women are raised for sacrifice. They sacrifice their desires, time, and independence, all in the name of family, reputation, and duty. And worst of all, they are taught to call that sacrifice love, virtue, or nature. In dialogue with Sartre, Beauvoir also uses the concept of bad faith, the tendency to run away from freedom and avoid taking responsibility for one's life. She recognizes that for many women, there may be comfort in being the object rather than the subject. It's easier to obey than to take responsibility for choosing. The second sex. This isn't a judgment, but a recognition of how deep oppression runs. If you grow up with no models of freedom, no room to develop your own will, it's understandable to accept the role you were given. But Beauvoir insists, freedom is still possible and necessary. Even when wounded, it can be reclaimed. So, she's not just exposing patriarchy, she's calling for liberation. She urges women to stop living as the other, and to become the subject of their own lives. It's easier for the oppressor to keep the oppressed ignorant than to convince them of their freedom. The second sex. The biggest consequence of this system is that not everyone is taught how to live a full life. The idea of an authentic, creative, conscious existence, so celebrated by philosophers, was denied to women for centuries. Not because of lack of ability, but because of a lack of opportunity, recognition, and space. To be free, for Beauvoir, doesn't mean living without limits. It means being able to choose with awareness, to accept the risks of life, and to create your own path. But how can a woman do that if she's taught from childhood to want what others expect of her, instead of what she truly wants? That's the root of gender alienation, internalizing imposed roles. Women are not only externally oppressed, they learn to oppress themselves. Breaking free from that requires a deep process of unlearning. Beauvoir's philosophy isn't just criticism, it's a call to freedom. And this freedom isn't abstract. It's lived, built, and practiced every day. Freedom is choosing yourself while also recognizing others as free. The ethics of ambiguity. Freeing yourself from gender conditioning doesn't mean rejecting femininity. It means rejecting an imposed destiny. It's reclaiming the right to be complex, active, thoughtful. It's being free to choose motherhood or not, marriage or not, caregiving or not, without those choices defining your worth. Beauvoir also stresses that women's liberation isn't just the responsibility of women, it's a collective project. It includes men, institutions, and culture. Fighting sexism is not about one group versus another. It's about humanity fighting against dehumanization. Unlike many abstract philosophical systems, Beauvoir gives us a grounded philosophy. She writes from the body, from lived experience, and in doing so, she reminds us that philosophy must serve life, not uphold hierarchies. Her critique is both social and existential. She shows that gender oppression isn't just political, it's a wound in the soul, a denial of our deepest freedom, the freedom to become who we are. Have you ever stopped to think how many of your desires are truly yours? How many of your choices were made by you? And how many were made for you? Are you living as a subject or just following a role you were taught to accept? Beauvoir would say, freedom is not something we're given, it's something we must fight for. And that fight begins with a silent, brave decision. I refuse to be what they expect. I want to be what I choose. What happens to human life when it's reduced to a function? When existence becomes all about routines, systems, goals, and impersonal roles? When real action is replaced by thoughtless repetition? For philosopher Hannah Arendt, this is one of the biggest dangers of modern society, turning life into nothing more than a machine. Author of The Human Condition, 1958, and Eichmann in Jerusalem, 1963, Arendt was one of the most original and sharp thinkers of the 20th century. She wasn't just interested in abstract ideas. She cared about real life, about politics, history, and above all, about our human ability to act freely. What makes us human is the ability to begin, to start something new. The human condition. But in Arendt's view, the modern world suppresses this ability. In the name of efficiency, order, and productivity, we've created systems that crush spontaneity, genuine action, and real thinking. The result? Life becomes flat, dull, and empty, a routine that just repeats itself without meaning. To understand her critique, it helps to look at the three types of human activity Arendt describes in The Human Condition. Labor, basic work for survival. Eating, cleaning, maintaining the body. Work, productive activity, building, creating, making lasting things. Action, political and existential activity, interacting freely with others, starting something new, expressing who we are. In ancient times, Especially in Greece, action was seen as the highest form of life. It's where human freedom truly showed. Labor, on the other hand, was just a necessity. But in the modern world, that hierarchy flipped. Now, labor has become the center of life. Everything revolves around tasks, output, performance. Labor became the dominant way of being in the world, the human condition. And this shift has serious consequences. When life is only about survival and usefulness, there's no room left for the unexpected, for creativity, for moments that don't have a clear goal. Life becomes automated. Humans turn into workers who execute, but don't act. This idea becomes even more powerful in Eichmann in Jerusalem, where Arendt reports on the trial of Adolf Eichmann, a man who helped organize the logistics of the Nazi Holocaust. People expected a monster. What Arendt found instead was an ordinary man, bland, average, and incapable of thinking for himself. Evil isn't radical, it's banal. It takes hold when people stop thinking. Eichmann in Jerusalem. The banality of evil doesn't mean evil is harmless. It means that truly horrific acts can be committed by ordinary people, as long as they stop thinking, stop questioning, and simply follow orders. Eichmann famously said, "I was just doing my job." For Arendt, that mindset shows how modern life can strip away personal responsibility. When people give up their ability to judge, reflect, and choose, they can end up doing anything. This is one of Arendt's most unsettling lessons. Great evil can be carried out by completely ordinary people, as long as they stop thinking. To Arendt, being human is not just about producing, it's about thinking, judging, and acting. And these things require time, space, and freedom. They can't be scheduled. They happen when we pause, reflect, and ask why. But modern society doesn't encourage thinking. It rewards repetition. The more predictable your behavior, the more efficiently the system runs. The ideal person in today's world is someone who performs, consumes, completes tasks, but never questions. Thinking begins where certainty ends. The life of the mind. That's why Arendt calls for a personal ethic of responsibility. No matter the system, political, social, religious, or corporate, the fundamental question must always be, does this make sense? And if it doesn't, it's your duty to stop, to resist, to take action. Arendt's critique isn't just political, it's existential. She shows how a life built around roles and repetition strips us of what's most human. The ability to begin, to start a conversation, a project, a thought, a relationship. That is what gives life meaning. But when life becomes nothing more than routines, schedules, and efficiency, there's no room for anything new. Spontaneity gets choked, and with it, joy disappears. Creativity fades. Surprise becomes rare. Life turns into managed survival, not lived experience. The miracle that saves the world, the realm of human affairs, is the fact of birth, the human condition. This poetic idea reminds us that we can be born again at any moment, but only if we act with freedom. And that takes courage. Courage to stop the machine, to think, to choose, to act. Another core idea in Arendt's work is the importance of public space as the place where freedom happens. For her, freedom isn't just a private feeling, it's something that happens out in the open. We are only truly free when we can speak, appear, debate, be seen, and interact with others. But in modern times, public space has been replaced by networks, markets, and bureaucracy. Politics has become either a show or pure management. Human interaction has become an algorithm. Meetings have turned into performances, and we've lost the experience of acting together. Public life, for Arendt, is where people truly become human. As plural beings who build a shared world where every voice matters. Reclaiming this space is part of reclaiming our humanity. So ask yourself, are you living with spontaneity or just running through the motions? Are you acting or just completing tasks? Are you thinking or just reacting? Arendt would say, human life begins where repetition ends. It begins in the unexpected moment, in the word that breaks the silence, in the courage to disobey. Because to truly live is more than just functioning. It's stepping into the world as someone unique, irreplaceable, and fully present. The body isn't just biological, it's political. That's one of the most powerful and unsettling ideas from the French philosopher Michel Foucault, author of books like Discipline and Punish, 1975, and The History of Sexuality, 1976. For Foucault, we live in a society that doesn't just control what we do, it shapes our bodies, our desires, our sense of reality, and even how we see ourselves. The freedom we celebrate might actually be a controlled freedom, one that's allowed, tolerated, and kept in check. And one of the most effective tools for that control, according to Foucault, is education. Not education as in liberating knowledge, but education as a system for producing obedient, predictable, and useful bodies. The body is directly involved in politics. Power reaches into it, marks it, trains it, tortures it, forces it to work, puts it through rituals, and demands signals from it. Discipline and Punish. In Discipline and Punish, Foucault traces the history of modern institutions, prisons, military barracks, hospitals, factories, and yes, schools, and shows that they all follow a similar logic, the logic of discipline. At school, students learn more than just facts. They learn to sit still, stay quiet, follow lines, and obey rules. They learn to ask permission to move, to repeat answers, to be judged by outside standards. What's being trained isn't just the mind, it's the body. School trains submissive bodies. It teaches obedience far more than knowledge. Foucault. The classroom, with its strict schedules, rules of behavior, and structured space, is a miniature surveillance system. The teacher watches, but more importantly, the setup teaches the student to watch themselves. That self-surveillance doesn't go away. It becomes part of us. Foucault introduces the concept of the panopticon, based on a prison design by Jeremy Bentham. It's a circular prison with a central tower, where one guard can observe all the prisoners, without them knowing if they're being watched. For Foucault, this becomes a metaphor for modern power. The goal is no longer to punish in public. It's to shape people from the inside out. It's not about using brute force, but about managing behavior, controlling movement, and influencing actions. The panopticon is a machine for separating the seen from the unseen. Discipline and Punish. According to Foucault, we now live in a panoptic society where surveillance is constant, everywhere, and internalized. We no longer need someone watching us. We've learned to censor ourselves. Society trains us to be predictable, to follow rules, to avoid standing out. Traditionally, power controlled land and territory. But Foucault shows that in the modern world, power targets the individual body. Not to destroy it, but to optimize it. The body must be healthy, productive, efficient, and useful. If it doesn't meet the standard, it's pushed aside. This process is what he calls biopower, the management of life through institutions. The body becomes something measured by statistics, medical guidelines, diet rules, and behavior standards. It's not just about living anymore, it's about living the right way. Modern power focuses on life itself: birth, health, sexuality, death. The history of sexuality. The body, which could be a space of desire, pleasure, and expression, becomes a disciplined project. It's shaped by school, family, media, fitness culture, and social networks. And the more it fits into the mold, the further it drifts from real freedom. Foucault wasn't against knowledge, but he deeply distrusted so-called truths. He believed that every form of knowledge is connected to some form of power. When schools define what's normal or smart, they're not just educating, They're enforcing a system of control. Where there is knowledge, there is power. Every form of knowledge is a strategy. Foucault. Modern education doesn't always liberate. Often, it trains people for the job market, for obedience, for performance. Critical thinking is discouraged. Questioning is punished. The ideal student is the one who repeats, not the one who creates. And perhaps the most disturbing part, the system creates people who believe they've made their own choices, who think they're free, while they're simply playing roles that were already assigned. That's the ultimate victory of discipline, the happy, obedient person. Foucault forces us to ask, are our choices really ours? Or are they shaped by invisible expectations, internalized norms, and control mechanisms we don't even notice anymore? We live in a society that talks endlessly about freedom, but enforces very strict standards of normality. There's a model for the ideal body, the successful life, the acceptable sexuality, the perfect career. And the more we conform, the freer we seem, but the more controlled we actually are. The individual is an effect of power. Foucault. The idea of the independent individual might actually be a product of the system itself. Being free, in this context, doesn't mean doing what you want. It means wanting what you've been trained to want. But Foucault wasn't a nihilist. He didn't say freedom is impossible. He said it takes critical awareness. Freedom isn't something we're born with. It's something we practice constantly. It means resisting imposed truths, single models, and the disciplining of the body. And that resistance doesn't require big revolutions. It happens in small acts of deviation, creativity, and experimentation. By living in your own way, by loving, thinking, learning, and desiring differently, you break the pattern. Where there is power, there is resistance. Foucault's philosophy is a call to question what we take for granted, to realize that what we call good behavior, success, maturity, is often just disguised conformity. To be free, then, is not just about breaking rules. It's about refusing the role you were given. It's about rewriting your life outside the script. And you? Are you aware of the patterns that shaped your body, your desires, your thoughts? Are you educating yourself for freedom or for adaptation? Are you thinking for yourself or just repeating what you were taught? Foucault would say, the body is the first battlefield, and to resist is to turn it into a space of invention, not obedience, because only when we stop functioning like parts in a machine can we finally live as free human beings. Do you really choose what you consume, or are you just following an invisible script where even your desires have already been programmed? That's the uncomfortable question at the core of Theodor Adorno's work, one of the leading thinkers of the Frankfurt School. Alongside Max Horkheimer, Adorno wrote Dialectic of Enlightenment, 1947, a powerful critique of mass culture and modern life under advanced capitalism. What Adorno points out goes beyond economic alienation. It's about how human experience itself is colonized by standardized entertainment, cultural commodities, and automatic consumption. For him, we're not truly living, we're consuming the idea of life. And what we're offered to enjoy isn't real, spontaneous, or authentic pleasure, but pleasure that's been manufactured, tamed, and packaged for us. Entertainment is the prolongation of work under capitalism. Dialectic of Enlightenment. Adorno coined the term culture industry to describe the system behind mass-produced entertainment, movies, music, TV, radio, and advertising. The term is intentionally ironic. It's an industry that turns culture into a product. In this system, art stops being an expression of thought and individuality. It becomes a formula designed for quick consumption. Art loses its role of challenging or inspiring us and just becomes something to pass the time. What was once creation becomes repetition. In the culture industry, the new is always the already known. Songs all sound the same. Movies follow the same plots. Stories comfort but never challenge. Everything is designed to be consumed effortlessly. The consumer doesn't have to think, just feel what's already been pre-selected. According to Adorno, mass culture creates a false sense of pleasure. The upbeat music, the light comedy, the predictable romance, it all feels relaxing, but in reality, it's just a break between work shifts. Modern entertainment doesn't free us, it numbs us. It offers pleasure that asks for no reflection, no creativity, no engagement. And in return, we become passive, complacent, addicted to the familiar. Culture stops encouraging us to ask who we are, and instead teaches us to accept what we're given. Entertainment is the opium of the masses. It's a harsh critique, but an important one, because in the name of fun, we give up our autonomy. We let others decide what's good, what's desirable, what's worth wanting. And over time, we forget how to desire for ourselves. Adorno wasn't against modernity or technology. His point was deeper. The way culture is organized shapes how we experience life. A real aesthetic experience, encountering art, ideas, or other people, takes time, attention, and openness. But in the culture industry, everything is fast, shallow, and instantly gratifying. Music becomes background noise, films become distractions, texts become slogans. The result? Our sensitivity fades, emotional depth gets lost, time fragments, contemplation disappears, and life becomes thin. Life is reduced to what can be absorbed with minimal effort. Dialectic of enlightenment. This isn't just about musical taste or movie preferences, it's about the formation of who we are. Repetition of the same cultural patterns creates individuals who are predictable, conforming, and uncritical. Mass culture trains our emotions, shapes how we see things, and narrows our thinking. It teaches us to seek instant gratification, to avoid discomfort, and to reject anything that's challenging. In doing so, it weakens our ability to imagine something different. And that's the key. People who consume the same pleasures every day lose the ability to imagine new ones. They lose political imagination, the drive to change things, the will to resist. Adorno shows that when culture becomes a product, it stops being a bridge to the human and becomes a tool of control. Instead of expanding awareness, it shrinks it. Instead of provoking thought, it distracts. Instead of opening up the world, it closes it. And this model isn't limited to music or film. It's everywhere, on social media, in apps, games, viral news. Everything is designed to entertain, hook, repeat. Life turns into a stream of short, fast, controlled stimuli. Life becomes function. Pleasure becomes product. Desire becomes algorithm. People no longer know what they want. They only want what they've been taught to want. The culture industry thrives on the illusion of choice. You can choose whatever you want to watch, listen to, consume. But as Adorno warns, that choice is often limited and sometimes completely fake. You might choose between 10 songs, but they all sound alike. Choose between 100 movies, but they all follow the same emotional script. Choose a lifestyle, but only if it fits within what the system can sell you. This is the false freedom of cultural capitalism, choosing from options that were already chosen for you. So, what does authentic life look like? Against this colonization of desire, Adorno calls for a return to critical, aesthetic, and reflective experience. He believed that real art, the kind that refuses to be a product, can still break the cycle. It can shake us, disturb us, wake us up. An authentic life isn't a life without pleasure. It's a life where pleasure comes from real encounters with the world. A life that takes emotional effort, values silence, and appreciates doubt. A life that doesn't just consume, but understands. Art is negative. It says no to what exists, and in doing so, keeps the possibility of the new alive. Adorno didn't believe in easy solutions. He knew the pressure to conform is overwhelming, but he insisted resistance begins with awareness, with refusing to be passive, with questioning what comes too easily. Autonomy isn't natural, it's built. And it starts the moment we ask ourselves, is what I want really mine? Are you truly living, or just consuming ready-made feelings? Are you desiring, or just reacting to pre-programmed signals. Adorno would say, real pleasure takes courage. The courage not to follow the script. The courage to question what feels normal. The courage to be more than a consumer, to be someone who feels, thinks, chooses, and lives deeply. Why are we always in a rush for everything, except truly living? Why do pleasure, rest, sensuality, and play always seem secondary, almost like guilty indulgences? According to philosopher Herbert Marcuse, the answer lies in the repressive logic that shapes modern society. Civilization has trained us to produce, not to enjoy. Marcuse, a key figure of the Frankfurt School, dedicated his work to showing how, even in times of material abundance, we live in a deep state of existential poverty. In his most famous book, Eros and Civilization, 1955, he combined Freudian psychoanalysis with Marxist critique to make a powerful point. Pleasure is repressed because it serves the system. Civilization represses not only destructive instincts, but also the erotic, playful, and imaginative ones, blocking the path to freer ways of living. Eros and civilization. So, what exactly is pleasure? First, Marcuse redefines it. He's not talking about shallow hedonism or quick gratification. For him, pleasure means fully experiencing the body, desire, creativity, beauty, rest, connection with others, and with yourself. It's what makes life not just bearable, but worth living. But in modern society, we're taught to be suspicious of pleasure. It's seen as a threat, a waste of time, something irresponsible. The old saying, work first, then pleasure, has been deeply internalized, and for many, that later never comes. Pleasure is delayed, redirected, and regulated until it's almost unrecognizable. Marcuse builds on Freud, especially civilization and its discontents, where Freud argues that civilization is built on repressing instincts, especially sexual energy, eros. Living in groups means controlling our impulses, or else chaos would reign. Freud saw this as a tragic necessity. The more civilized we become, the more pleasure we sacrifice. But Marcuse questions this. Is all this repression really necessary? Or is part of it just a way to keep an economic system running, one built on discipline and productivity? It's not civilization itself that demands repression, but the specific form it takes under capitalism, eros and civilization. That's where his concept of surplus repression comes in, a level of control over our bodies and desires that goes beyond what's actually needed, just to keep people working, consuming, and obeying. In this model, true pleasure becomes dangerous. But Marcuse goes further. He shows how the system doesn't erase desire, it redirects it. Erotic energy, or libido, gets channeled into behaviors and objects that don't threaten the status quo. Sensuality is commercialized, sexuality is sanitized, eroticism becomes a product. Porn, advertising, body obsession, these things seem to celebrate desire, but actually reduce it to a show. Real erotic energy gets drained, turned into a commodity, shaped to fit into neat, marketable boxes. The promise is pleasure, but what we really get is distraction. Advanced industrial society represses eroticism because it carries the seed of freedom. Marcuse's true eros, he says, is rebellious. It doesn't follow schedules or rules. It wants just because it wants, not for profit, not for utility. The erotic body is a free body, and that's exactly why the system works to control it. Marcuse also points to how we experience time. Free time has been colonized by the logic of productivity. When we're not working, we're told to consume. Rest becomes just another form of consumption. Leisure becomes a service. Doing nothing becomes shameful. The time for love, reflection, play, or silence. It disappears. We live in a rush, and rush is the enemy of real pleasure. Because true pleasure requires presence. It asks for time, for attention, for slowing down. It means seeing time not as a resource, but as life. To free pleasure, we must first free time. Marcuse. The most disturbing part of Marcuse's critique is this: repression isn't just imposed on us, it's internalized. We learn to police our own desires. We feel guilty about rest. We think we only deserve pleasure if we've been productive enough. Pleasure becomes a reward, not a right, something to be earned, not simply lived. And the body? Instead of being a space for expression, it turns into a tool for performance. The result? A tired society, anxious people, a life that functions but isn't really lived. But Marcuse doesn't stop at critique. He offers hope. He calls for the recovery of eros as a force for change. To him, eroticism, understood as a creative, sensitive, and loving force, can become the foundation for a new kind of society, a world that values beauty, sensitivity, and the things we do for no other reason than joy, where work is not alienating but expressive, where the body is not a burden but a source of power, where free time is truly free, where play isn't just for kids but a valid way of existing. To imagine a non-repressive civilization is to imagine a world where pleasure and reason are no longer at odds. Eros and civilization. That vision isn't naive. It's an ethical horizon, a bold critique of a system we've accepted as normal, a call to rethink what we label as mature, useful, or efficient. A radical idea: we have the right to pleasure. And you? How often do you let yourself feel, without rushing, without guilt? How much of your day is guided by real desire? And how much is just routine in disguise? Do you work to live, or just live to produce? Marcuse would say, pleasure is not a luxury, it's a human need. And freedom begins when we allow ourselves to live with our full bodies, with free time, with desire that's still alive. Everything is constantly changing. But what happens to us when nothing stays the same? That's one of the central questions raised by sociologist and philosopher Zygmunt Bauman, who coined the powerful metaphor of liquid modernity, a phrase that perfectly captures our current world: fast-moving, unstable, and full of uncertainty. According to Bauman, we live in a time where nothing seems to last. Relationships, jobs, beliefs, identities, life plans, everything feels temporary, disposable, replaceable. And this liquidity isn't just about the economy or technology. It's existential. It leaves us constantly anxious and unsettled. In liquid modernity, the only thing stable is instability itself. Bauman describes two phases of modernity: solid and liquid. In the solid phase, mostly the 19th and 20th centuries, life was built on stable structures, long-lasting institutions, shared values, steady relationships. There was a sense of direction, progress, and relatively firm identity. But with globalization, digital revolutions, and the rise of fast-paced consumer culture, we've entered the era of liquid modernity, a time where everything slips through our fingers. Connections are fragile, promises are uncertain, and the future is impossible to predict. Relationships flow like water, with no fixed shape. They adapt, they vanish. Liquid love. This reality makes it incredibly hard to commit to anything long-term. In a world where everything might change tomorrow, why commit today? Bauman noticed that in liquid life, commitment is often viewed with suspicion. Being tied to someone or something is seen as a threat to freedom, as a limitation. We prefer to keep our options open, contracts flexible, connections reversible. This applies to work. I need to stay open to new opportunities. To love, better not get too involved. Even to identity, I want to keep all possibilities on the table. But this limitless freedom doesn't free us, it paralyzes us. When everything is possible, nothing feels secure. Liquid life. As a result, many of us live with a sense of chronic anxiety. We struggle to plan our futures with confidence. Our choices feel temporary. Our connections feel weak. And without real roots, we drift. Free, yes, but also lonely and lost. Bauman believed that people need meaning. We need something that gives our lives coherence, something that connects our past, present, and future. But liquid life cuts that thread. It breaks that continuity. This leads to what he called ontological insecurity, a deep unease not caused by external threats, but by the lack of solid foundations inside us. It's not that we don't know what we want. It's that we don't know if what we want is worth wanting. Bauman. Without lasting bonds, without true belonging, without time to deepen our relationships or ideas, life becomes a series of shallow experiences. We touch everything, but never dive deep into anything. We're always connected, but never grounded. This superficiality wears us down. It creates a kind of moral fatigue, a feeling of emptiness that even constant stimulation can't fix. Bauman also criticized the role of social media in fueling this liquidity. He believed these platforms promise connection, but really deliver visibility without depth. We exchange messages, likes, and comments, but rarely build relationships that can hold the weight of real life. Social media encourages image, not self-awareness. It rewards performance, not presence. We're pushed to show idealized versions of ourselves, and in doing so, we lose touch with our real, lived experience. On social media, we're surrounded by friends, but starving for real friendship. Bauman. This hypervisibility doesn't bring us closer. It makes us feel even more alone. Because what we're missing isn't information, it's intimacy. Not interaction, but connection. And real connection takes time, listening, and vulnerability. In his book, Liquid Love, Bauman explores how consumer logic affects even our emotions. We look for relationships that are fast, easy, and low risk. We want the pleasure of connection without the responsibility that comes with it. Just like we switch products, we switch partners. Everything, even people, becomes consumable. Liquid love is a disposable relationship, easy to begin, easy to end, hard to deepen. Liquid love. But for Bauman, love requires time, effort, and commitment. It can't be reduced to impulse or convenience. When love becomes a consumer experience, it loses its depth, and we become emotionally fragile. We're afraid of getting too close, and at the same time, we're desperate for something to hold on to. This contradiction tears us apart. We want safety, but reject the risk it requires. Bauman's critique of liquid life isn't just social or psychological, it's deeply existential. He reminds us that for a life to be full and meaningful, it needs to be rooted. We need continuity, loyalty, responsibility. We must be willing to stand by our choices, even when we feel uncertain. But we live in a world that celebrates detachment, speed, and the short term. And in doing so, we forget. True freedom isn't the absence of commitment, it's choosing the commitments that matter. To commit is an act of courage. It's saying that, even in uncertainty, something is worth holding on to. Bauman. So how do we resist the pull of liquid life? Bauman doesn't offer quick solutions, but his work invites us to seriously reflect on our choices. Liquid life isn't our destiny. It's a dominant model, and like all models, it can be questioned, reimagined, and reshaped. Resisting liquidity doesn't mean clinging to the past. It means reclaiming the value of depth and rootedness, building deep connections, even if with just a few, creating inner space and quiet in the middle of chaos, making conscious choices, even in a world of endless options, taking responsibility for your life, for others, for your truth. This kind of resistance takes courage, the courage to swim against the current. And you? Are you living with purpose or just floating with the tide? Do you have real bonds or just fleeting connections? Are you building a life that lasts or just collecting moments with no memory. Bauman would say, in liquid times, the most radical act is to stay when everything pushes you to run, to commit when everything tells you to replace, to live with depth when the world urges you to stay on the surface. We're always tired, but we're not even sure why. We sleep too little, think too much, and feel guilty for resting. And even when we're doing a lot, it never feels like enough. This quiet, growing discomfort has a name, according to South Korean philosopher Byung-Chul Han, the exhaustion of freedom. In books like The Burnout Society, The Agony of Eros, and Psychopolitics, Han offers a sharp critique of modern culture. He argues that we've moved from a society of repression, as Foucault described, into something new, a system built on positivity and performance. We live in an era where freedom has become a new form of control. The Burnout Society. In the past, oppression was easy to spot: strict rules, punishments, authority figures. Today, it's invisible, it's internal, it's self-imposed. We don't need a boss watching us anymore. We've become our own supervisors. We've turned into personal entrepreneurs of our lives. The system no longer says, obey. Now it says, push yourself, be creative, win, become your best self. Positivity is the new command. There's no room to feel weak, sad, or unproductive. Happiness has become a duty. The performance subject is both the master and the slave. Han. This forced positivity turns each of us into an endless project. We're always in debt to ourselves. We live under the tyranny of not yet successful, not yet good enough, not yet found my purpose. What looked like freedom, the ability to do anything, becomes a heavy burden. Han sees chronic exhaustion as the spiritual illness of our time. Not the physical tiredness of a hard day's work, but a constant blurry fatigue that never goes away. It's the exhaustion of always having to prove yourself, to others, to yourself, to the algorithm. We no longer die of the plague, we die of heart attacks from too much. The Burnout Society. This excess doesn't come from outside control, but from an inner pressure to perform. You have to be productive at work, active on social media, healthy, creative, informed, attractive, available. Even rest has become performance. If you read a book or watch a movie, it's to be more cultured, interesting, or marketable. Leisure, boredom, and stillness, essential parts of the human soul, are now seen as worthless. In this system, if you're not producing, you don't matter. One of Han's key ideas is that positivity can also be violent. It doesn't yell, punish, or command. It smothers you with soft demands. It hides exploitation under enthusiasm. It replaces fear of punishment with anxiety about not being enough. The happiness imperative is really a form of oppression. Mahan. In the age of positivity, failure isn't allowed. But without the freedom to fail, how can we be human? We can't stop, step back, or admit we're tired or lost. This is the modern prison, one without bars, built with invisible walls of self-pressure. In The Agony of Eros, Han argues that too much positivity traps us in ourselves. We focus only on our image, our performance, our growth, and in the process, we lose sight of the other. The other, in a deep human sense, is the one who unsettles us, challenges us, brings us out of ourselves. But in a narcissistic, self-centered culture, the other becomes a threat. We seek mirrors, not difference. We want validation, not real connection. Love requires pause, listening, vulnerability. But all of that has been replaced with exposure. Han-human relationships become functional. Connections become transactional. Emotion turns into algorithm. And what we lose, says Han, is exactly what might heal us. Real presence, shared silence, slow contemplation. Idleness as resistance. One of Han's most beautiful ideas is reclaiming idleness, not as laziness, but as a radical act of resistance. In a world that demands constant acceleration, slowing down is subversive. Don't reply, don't perform, don't post, don't compete, just be. We need non-productive spaces for thought to emerge. Mime the transparency society. It's in silence that we learn to listen. It's in the pause that creativity is born. It's in non-function that meaning grows. Reclaiming idleness is reclaiming the soul. It's remembering that we are not just tasks and goals. We are also longing, mystery, silence, and limits. For Han, the true revolution won't be technological, it will be spiritual, not driven by productivity, but by reconnecting with our own fragility, returning to slow time, human connection, and contemplative life. What we lack isn't speed, it's meaning. Han. This slow utopia doesn't mean doing nothing. It means making time for listening, deep reading, endless conversations, and love that isn't transactional. It means creating space for what the market calls useless, but what our souls know is essential. How many times have you felt exhausted without doing anything physical? How many times have you faked enthusiasm because sadness felt unacceptable? How many times have you just wanted to stop, but felt guilty for it? Han would say, you're not failing. You're being crushed by an impossible ideal. You're living in a world that turned freedom into pressure and rest into a sin. But there's still time to reclaim your body, your silence, your presence, your human pace. Stopping is an act of courage. Saying no to toxic positivity is saying yes to a more authentic life. And remembering that in the end, life isn't a performance, it's simply being. In a world where everything is measured by usefulness, what does it mean to simply respect life? Not productive life or efficient, profitable life, but life itself in all its fragility, mystery, and dignity. That was the radical and often forgotten idea of Albert Schweitzer, philosopher, doctor, theologian, musician, and one of the great humanists of the 20th century. Schweitzer is known for one simple yet revolutionary principle: reverence for life. At a time marked by war, rapid industrialization, and environmental destruction, he proposed an ethic centered not on profit or productivity, but on the absolute value of every living being. I am life that wants to live, surrounded by life that wants to live. Albert Schweitzer. This sentence captures the heart of his philosophy. Life isn't a resource to be used or a function to be fulfilled. It's sacred in and of itself, and that sacredness applies to everything that lives: humans, animals, plants, ecosystems. Where there is life, there is value. And where there is value, there is responsibility. Schweitzer criticized how modern life treats everything, including life, as a tool. We live in a culture that only values what's useful, efficient, and productive. Even people are measured by how much they can produce, by their careers, incomes, performance. But what about those who can't produce? The sick, the poor, the elderly, the unproductive. They're ignored, excluded, treated like a burden. The logic of utility dehumanizes. Schweitzer offers an antidote to that, an unconditional ethic of life. Good is anything that preserves, enhances, or values life. Evil is anything that destroys, diminishes, or disrespects it. Culture and ethics. This ethic is simple but powerful. It doesn't require religion, doctrine, or dogma, just awareness and sensitivity. The ability to recognize the value of life in others, even when they're different, fragile, or silent. Reverence doesn't mean fear or submission. It's a deep respect for the mystery of existence. Schweitzer believed that life is such a unique and extraordinary phenomenon that any act of violence against it is, first and foremost, a betrayal of ourselves. He didn't come to this conclusion through blind faith, but through a life of reflection and service. He studied philosophy, theology, and medicine. He played Bach beautifully. He built a hospital in Gabon, Africa, and spent decades treating patients in harsh conditions. And through all of it, he came to one conviction: life doesn't need to justify itself through external value. Life is the value. Schweitzer was writing during a time when the world had become numb to the suffering of others. World wars, colonialism, hunger, exploitation, all were justified in the name of progress. He saw cold, calculated reason as a threat to our humanity. Universal ethics begins the moment I stop turning a blind eye to someone's pain. Schweitzer. For him, a truly human being is one who feels with others, who's moved to act even when there's no personal gain. It's not about heroism, it's about empathy. It's about taking humanity seriously. Schweitzer's ethic is universal. It makes no distinction between higher and lower life. He called for respect not only for human life, but for animal life and nature as well. Long before environmentalism became a global issue, he was already saying, "To destroy nature is to destroy yourself." That message is even more urgent today as we face a deep spiritual and ecological crisis. Climate change, ecosystem collapse, species extinction, all of it rooted in the same mindset, seeing life as a resource instead of a value. Schweitzer invites us to shift that mindset, to move from a predatory view of the world to one of reverence, a stance of care, responsibility, and humility in the presence of all living things. But make no mistake, Schweitzer's reverence is not passive. It's a call to action, conscious, ethical, compassionate action. It's not about worshipping life in a romantic way. It's about committing to it. That's why Schweitzer worked as a doctor, writer, and activist. He was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize in 1952 for his humanitarian efforts. But more than awards, what matters is that he lived what he believed. For him, ethics wasn't theory, it was a way of living. There's no true freedom where there's indifference to life. Schweitzer. In times of burnout, moral confusion, and indifference to suffering, Schweitzer's message may sound almost radical. What if the meaning of life is simply to protect life? What if our highest purpose isn't to conquer, to accumulate, or to win, but to care? This reverence-based ethic is a powerful alternative to modern nihilism. It doesn't require belief in an external God. It just asks us to look at another being and recognize in them the same mystery that lives in us. Whoever does not revere life will never understand what it means to be truly human. Schweitzer. Do you only value life when it's useful? Do you only respect others when they deserve it? Do you see yourself as just a function or as a unique expression of existence? Schweitzer would say, to revere life is to recover the soul of the world. It's saying no to cynicism, to haste, to indifference. It's walking with more care, touching with more kindness, seeing with deeper eyes. Because in the end, life needs no justification. It is, in itself, the greatest value of all. And remembering that is where real life begins. If you've made it this far, thank you so much. Reflecting on life, time, pleasure, and freedom isn't easy. It takes courage. The courage to pause, to feel, to truly think. And if you're here, it's because you chose that courage. That already says a lot about you. Now, I want to invite you to keep going on this journey. If this video spoke to you in any way, give it a like. It helps this content reach more people who, like you, are looking to live with more awareness. Leave a comment. Which of these ideas impacted you the most? What made you rethink how you live? Your reflection might inspire someone else. And I read every single comment. Share this video. Send it to a friend, a loved one, someone who might need to hear this today. Philosophy isn't just for famous thinkers. It's for all of us. And it can change lives. Subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. Each video here is an invitation to deeper thinking, self-awareness, and reflection. If you feel like something's missing, time, meaning, presence, this space is for you. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.